Hey, Mark.
Hey, David. Here we are.
Here we are. That's right.
It's great.
How are you doing today, and how are things going?
I'm doing fairly well today, and things are going smoothly. I've been working on Entrypoint, doing some software development. How about yourself?
Yeah, going good. It's nice out, so I just took a walk and came back. Excited to chat with you. For the benefit of our audience, how about you give us a little bit of an intro? Um,
Sure. So my name's Mark Hennings. Um, I've been an entrepreneur since college. And before that, when I was growing up, I would always be building video games or making websites. I was trying to think earlier, I think I've been writing HTML since 2003 or something. Um, and so I've just always had it in me that I like to build things. And so I've built a handful of businesses. I started in video production in college. That was something I was passionate about as a hobby, and I realized I could make money doing it more than I could make working just part time at a retail store, for example. And then I wrote my first app, which turned into Simple Booth, which is my SaaS company. We also have a hardware product. And Simple Booth, we made the Inc. 500 in 2018. So that was a highlight there. That's been my most successful business. And more recently, I've been very excited about AI and building tools in the AI space to help other people take advantage of the capabilities that are out there.
Very exciting. So tell us about Simple Boot. Maybe that's kind of your initial entry into this entrepreneurship journey. So, how did you get the idea? How can you tell us the beginning of it?
Sure. I was, let's call it a junior in college, plus or minus a year. And I was running my video production business. I had a couple employees. We had a little office. We were filming weddings, making YouTube videos for businesses, um, marketing videos, training videos in the studio with green screen, and just kind of whatever jobs we could attract. I was just having fun exploring the whole space of digital media. And so I was in this entrepreneurship club called the Collegiate Entrepreneurs Organization. And I would kind of go there and film the speakers or film the events too, and just turned it into like a way to promote my business also through that club. So they all knew what I was doing, of course, and we all talked about what kind of businesses we were running or thinking of starting. But there was this guy, Chris, who said, "Hey, we're throwing this after party for the Midwest Entrepreneurship Conference. Do you think you could set up a photo booth?" I don't know if I ever used a photo booth up to that point in my life. But I thought, hey, that's something that people pay money for. Maybe I should figure out how to set one up. Like another hustle running, because I was just ready to do. I was just excited about everything. So I put together what a photo booth would consist of. I had my DSLR camera. I had this little card that would transmit images to an iPad, so people could see the photos and even share them to Facebook, which was really, really new and novel at the time. And then a backdrop with a flash too, so flash white, and it'd be this kind of like studio backdrop. And people just had so much fun. I don't know if I'd ever seen people just quite in that context, just having such a blast taking pictures. Um, iPhones were getting big, but I think I had a flip phone. Like phone cameras were not that exciting at the time. So it's not like we as a society had kind of, I don't know, become fully submerged into the photo taking euphoria yet. So it blew my mind. And I thought, well, I have to do something more with this. And it seemed like I could really anchor it around that experience of seeing your photo in real time and sharing it on social, since that was so big. So I actually challenged my whole team to just learn something new one week. And for me, that became learning how to write code for iOS, which was in Objective-C. And I walked into the Mac store. I bought my first Mac. It was a Mac Mini, and I set it up at my kitchen table and started Googling how to do things in Objective-C. And eventually I put together an app called Live Booth. I had my designer I worked with in video production. He designed the app. And Live Booth would sync photos and display them. And it was this kind of kiosk app. You could add it to any existing photo booth. So that was the idea with Live Booth, is it'd be like an add-on to your current photo booth. And it was maybe a few months into that I just thought, like, iPads have cameras too. Why don't we take the picture on the iPad, make it do the whole thing? It'd be really simple. We'll call it Simple Booth. Boom. And that was actually the thing that took off.
Yeah. So what was the business model like with the app?
So I started by selling it as a one-time purchase. So with Live Booth, I priced it at, I think, $150 on the App Store, which was weird. Apps were $1. So I was selling a $150 app. And I couldn't find many examples of people doing that other than as jokes. And the first night I put Live Booth up, I got an email. So I knew somebody had downloaded it, because you didn't get the app analytics, the sales numbers, until the next day. But I knew somebody had bought it because they emailed me with questions about how to use the app. And I was so excited. And I thought, I'm going to be rich. Somebody's going to buy this every day. And then 2 people are going to buy it every day. And then it was like a month and a half before anybody else downloaded it. With Simple Booth, we also started with a one-time purchase model, just because that was simple and subscriptions were harder to set up. So I needed to get something out there into the world. And we had a pro edition of Simple Booth that we were selling for like $300.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and you get the license for in perpetuity, like it's like a one-time payment. That's it.
Well, that's how we started. But subscriptions are much better. And we switched over to a subscription model in 2016, and we really never looked back.
Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of like learning programming, what was that process like? Where did you find, which was your best resource?
It's just infinite Google tabs. I mean, the process of learning programming has changed so much, and there's never been a better time to learn programming, because talking to ChatGPT is so much easier, because you can explain like your really bad understanding of what you're trying to do to it, and it'll sort of grok it and tell you where you're wrong, if you're asking it correctly. But yeah, back in the day, it was just open Google tabs, search, or Chrome tabs, whatever.
You didn't do a coding boot camp or anything like that?
No, I'm all self-taught, for
Self-taught.
better or worse.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
fragments from here and there.
How did you make it to the Inc. 500?
Well, we grew tremendously for a couple of years, and we had a really low base. So they measure it over like a 3-year period, and it's the last year versus the starting base. And the lower that base is, and the faster you grow in the middle, is how they calculate like the fastest growing companies. And that's and what number you reach in the 3rd year through that time window. So we just had a really, really fast growth period. When we switched over to subscriptions, grew to several $1 million.
Could they find you, or
$100,000.
you kind of have to put yourself out there, like as far as Inc. 500 goes? Do they find you?
You have to apply.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you did apply, and then they kind of look at your numbers, and then they say, "Oh yeah, you've made the list."
Yeah, they ask for some verification. I forget if it was tax returns or they make sure the numbers are legit. But
yeah, that makes sense. Which year did you make it?
2018.
2018.
Yeah.
Nice.
Number 415, 414. So, so that was fun, seeing the company in the magazine.
Yeah, very cool indeed.
You have
What
to pay
were
for the signs too; those don't come free.
say
You have
what?
to buy the signs, and then you have to license their logo too.
Oh,
If you
is that
want.
right?
Yeah, it's
Once,
like a
even
whole.
though you won like 449, you still have to.
Yeah,
It's
you don't get anything for free. It's like you
it's
pay
still
for.
cool though. I would buy it. Yeah,
I know. Yeah,
yeah,
it's still fun.
yeah, definitely. What were from there's a lot of mobile app entrepreneurs out there. What are some lessons learned running a mobile app company? Like what is unique about mobile apps and that business model?
Whew. Mobile apps are, I think, a really tough business. Um, I think there was a window in time where individual developers could put an app on the App Store and like make a decent living from maybe a couple of cool apps that do a couple of cool things. And I feel like now you either have to be a mega hit or you don't make anything. Um, Now, the exception to that is perhaps B2B apps. So Simple Booth actually mainly falls in that category. We're a little niche because um, like you'll see us sometimes at the top revenue in the photo apps on iPad, but it's only because it's their iPad grouped apps. So like the store for iPad specific apps is a lot smaller than like all the iPhone apps. So we do pretty well on iPad,
Yeah.
and setting up a DIY photo booth is kind of a niche. So I believe we attract most of our customers like ourselves, and then we send them to the App Store. Whereas a lot of app developers kind of hope, like, I'll put it on the App Store and I'll get found, and I think
Right.
that's really hard to do now. So yeah,
So your customer acquisition model was a little bit outside the app store, is what you're saying.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
got it.
We made videos. I had a YouTube video that got close to 1 million views over the years of how to set up a DIY photo booth. And we set up landing pages and did SEO. And then, fortunately, we were one of the early movers, so we attracted a pretty good. We solidified a pretty good position there.
Do you think? I mean, one is better than the other, or it sort of depends on the app that you're putting out there. Like sounds like there's one model where you can attract customers outside the app store. The other model is more like just being found on the app store. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on why you sort of decided to go that route of outside
Mhm.
the app store.
Yeah.
Was there any analytics or anything that you found that was helpful?
Well, for us, you can't set up a do-it-yourself photo booth by just downloading an app. There's a hardware element. Um, so for us, it's like we need to tell this story about the lighting, where you put it, how
Got
you
it.
design like a lot of people like to design an overlay or a graphic to go on the photos. And so there's a lot that goes around it. Um, so for simpler apps where you don't need a web platform or something like that, maybe getting found on the App Store is still viable. But even still, then I think it's like you're either like in the club of the top apps or you're not. And to get in the club, I think you have to do something external. Like
Mhm.
a lot of apps work with celebrities or do influencer launches in the consumer space to get the initial traction, where
Yeah,
you're just never in that like special club.
yeah,
So
yeah. Did you, once you got that initial traction, did you find yourself being found on the App Store a little bit more, or your model was entirely continuing that same, like outside and then pointing to the App Store?
It can be hard to separate the two because the App Store never really provides any kind of attribution to where sales come from, or how they found you. Um, what's funny is we had this free iPhone app for years that we just sunsetted. Actually, this month we said goodbye to it, but it was our one app that would often get featured on the App Store. Not too often. A lot of times it was in other countries, not US featured. That would be like a really big deal. Um, but we never monetized it that well. So it didn't really, even though it got free downloads, people didn't stick around on it. It had poor retention. And so even though it would get found through the App Store, we let it go.
Yeah, let's talk about your team a little bit. How do you? I know with this, it was initially that Booth from the video production company, and you had your co-founder. With Entrypoint, maybe kind of like your overarching principles for people that you like working with. Is there anything that Mark has? What would that be?
Of like how of the people I like to work with, just like
Yeah,
how I know if someone's a good fit to work
yeah,
with or not. Yeah. I really like to work with interesting people. So people who have interests maybe outside of what I'm hiring them for or looking to work with them on. Because I'm kind of like that. I don't really like to be put in a box of
right.
like, oh, I'm a photo booth guy now because I started a photo booth business. I don't really want to be in that box, right? Like, and I have interests outside of work. So, and I just think that people who pursue passions, like on some level, they're a little more ambitious and like maybe more creative. Like that dopamine, they let it flow more freely for some reason. And they're just more fun, whole. I like to work with whole people, like I
Yeah.
suppose. Um,
That's
so
Ravikant, the guy who
I'm sorry,
created.
cut out for a sec.
Am I back?
Yeah, I think so.
I was going to say, I was saying, I don't know if you've heard of the guy who created Angel List, Naval Ravikant. Um, he wrote a book called Almanac of Naval Ravikant, and in that he says he likes to do fun things with fun people. It's like I think his quote is something like play long-term games with long-term people. He just kind of
Yeah,
chooses to work with folks that he likes. um, that's an interesting way I really like that, actually. Like, you're still having fun, and work is not necessarily just work. You're pursuing other things, and you have some passions that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the same passion. Not like, oh, he rides a bicycle, I am a big bicycle rider too, so, or a
yeah,
mountain biker or anything like, or I'm a golfer and he's also a golfer. It doesn't have to be that. I think it's finding some sort of a common thread of, and it's something that is interesting that you see in the other person, makes you curious about them, and you kind of learn something from them, and they learn something from you.
yeah, absolutely. I should also say that I like to work with people who are really good at what they do. Like if they can explain what they do to me in a way that I've never thought of it, I'll be really excited to work with them. It's like they have insights that not everybody
Yeah.
has, and that. But
Yeah, I think
um,
naturally high ambitious people are going to network with high performers, and high achievers. So potentially there's like a match that sort of like, mutually works out.
mhm.
Um, in
you,
terms of, yeah, go ahead.
you spend so much of your time working. I mean, you want to surround yourself with people you enjoy working with, because it's really all about the journey. I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of like even the time that you spend working doesn't necessarily feel like work. It's sort of like, creativity, problem solving. There's so many, like things that go with it.
mhm.
It no longer feels like you're grinding it out 9 to 5.
Yeah,
It's like you would continue to work. It's very fascinating that way. Are there any entrepreneurs you kind of look up to, you follow, you like somebody's style?
so bad at thinking of names. Um, Ray Dalio. He wrote a great book. Um, I I don't know. I've never been a huge fanboy of anyone or anything in
Yeah,
particular. Like, I've never had role models where I want to be just like that person.
yeah,
It's always like, oh, there's elements of that person that I'd like to borrow. There's aspects I'd like to copy, but
yeah,
I'd like to pull some from this person and some from that person. Um, like Warren Buffett has had an amazing career, right? And
yeah.
he's done super well. And when I read his biography, I learned a bunch of stuff and ways to think about investing. But I would never want to be that obsessed with money. Like, um, so I don't want to be exactly like him. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
so there's always aspects. But yeah, Will Schroeder is a super cool guy. Runs startups.com.
Yeah.
I've talked to him and I love his podcast. Um,
Nice.
Maybe he's the guy I most want to be like.
Nice.
I'll be his fanboy, I guess.
Have you used the Principles app, Ray Dalio's Principle app?
No, um, I have
If
not.
you,
It,
I would recommend it. Like if you like his book, it's got an assessment. Um, it takes you 3 minutes to complete that assessment. Obviously, you got to register and stuff. It's free. Anybody can take it. And then it comes back with sort of like, hey, this is your primary personality, and this is your
mhm,
two secondary personalities. And it also does a good job. Like you can send that to your team members or friends or really anybody, and then it lets you compare sort of like disc profile or whatever, whichever profile test. There's so many
mhm.
out there, but I liked the presentation of how it shows that on the mobile. It's a mobile app, so
Yeah,
uh, if you ever get a chance, you should check that out. And I really like that one. What, speaking of Warren Buffett, as much as the guy is, multi-billionaire and stuff like that, even if you gave me that sort of money, I really don't want to be doing the stuff that he's doing. It just sounds so boring. I mean, obviously, it's, but it's like being obsessed with managing wealth and portfolios and things like that sounds pretty monotonous and mediocre to me. So I think
yeah. And not
what do
being
you?
willing to spend it, like it's always about just hoarding it. It's about seeing the number go up, and never indulging on something, besides a Coke and hamburger. So that's not me.
But I think there's that legendary story about him. I don't know if it was Charlie Munger or somebody who comes to him and says, "Hey, I want to work with you." And then he says, create a list of the 25 top things that matter to you the most. And then, so they create that list. I don't know if it's him or somebody else, but it's kind of like a legend
Mm,
that's attributed to Warren Buffett. And then he says, well, strike out all the 20 focus on the top five, or even maybe even three, I think, as well. I think that's sort of like something that you can pick from him, that I really like from what he said there. But it's very interesting. For the startups.com, what do you think is attractive to the way he runs it? I forget his name.
Oh, Will Schroeder.
Yeah, Will Schroeder.
That's interesting. I don't actually know how well he runs it, or if.
Or maybe like, what is it about him that you think that makes you feel like, hey, I can see myself like that?
On some points he'll go pretty contrarian, and he'll just like say stuff that makes sense and is obvious, but most people aren't saying, and that's really like appealing to me, because I think sometimes I see stuff that it seems obvious to me, and I just want to hear somebody else say it, right? So I can be validated. It's like, why is everyone thinking this way? Am I the only one that sees it differently right now? And just in his podcast, he's always, putting things really plainly, and that's just reminds me of the way I think. I try to break things down into their simplest forms, and not leave them esoteric and abstract, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. So, maybe you'll have. Sounds like he's watched a lot of contrarian thoughts, and then you seem like a guy who's gravitating towards that, and you want to be like that yourself too. So, I think.
Sometimes, but I'm not a contrarian, because contrarians are like consistently against the mainstream. And I just think that like sometimes the mainstream is right and sometimes the contrarians are right. So
Yeah,
you
well,
have
I
to
think you don't
pick
want to be
and
a
choose.
contrarian for contrarian's sake. I mean, you just to
Yeah.
contradict everything that some people. I think contrarian being that, then you're sort of like not necessarily a contrarian, I would say, right? I mean, you kind of have to have some controversial views on certain things that you're going against the grain, so to speak, and on the majority of the proven stuff that is out there, the things that work, it works, right?
Yeah.
um, so I
Maybe
think.
pragmatist. Maybe he's a pragmatist, and
Right.
that's how I identify
Yeah.
as.
Fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about your latest venture, Entrypoint.ai. How did you start that?
It was December of 2022, and I had been talking to actually a contractor at Simple Booth, Miha, who had written really good copy for Simple Booth, but more importantly, he was an entrepreneur running basically a marketing agency that was doing copywriting for businesses, and he was doing that very well and doing good work for us. And we were having interesting conversations on Slack. He lives in Slovenia, so ways apart. We haven't met in person, but that's okay, because chat is like very natural for me. I think I've been doing that since the AOL Instant Messenger days, so that's no problem. Anyway, so him and I were talking about ChatGPT and AI, and he just kind of throws it out there like, if you ever want to start an AI business together, let's talk, which got me thinking. And after ChatGPT came out, I spent quite a bit of time looking through the OpenAI API documentation to just see kind of the inner workings of what was available there to build on. And fine tuning really caught my interest, the fine tuning APIs. Just this idea that like you could train a model yourself through an API, and then you trained an AI model. It sounds really cool, right? So I thought that was really interesting. And the more I kept digging into it, the more I became convinced that there's a million ways you can take these, a million different directions you can take these models, and they will be taken in a million ways.
Right.
And there will need to be tools to do that. So I started with Miha building out the architecture and the foundation for what Entrypoint would become. And we worked on it we've still been working on it, but we launched in July of 2023 on Product Hunt, and we keep adding features and functionality. So, yeah, that's the gist of it.
Yeah, yeah. And so you haven't met your co-founder in person, but you've had a good sort of like you said the conversation flows when you guys jump on, virtually on calls. Um, I'm curious, like, is there any sort of way for somebody who wants to work with a virtual co-founder? Is it, or would you like, do you feel like working with somebody for this long, do you have any tips, any guidance on how potentially something like that can, somebody can make that happen?
Yeah, I don't know. Every situation is different. It's like people don't come along that often where you just click and you know it. So I would say don't force it. Just because
Right.
somebody has the skills on their resume or their LinkedIn or whatever does not make them co-founder material.
Right.
Like Miha, he's in this like entrepreneurial phase where I just see him constantly learning and getting better at things. And I'm like, hey, whatever direction we take this business, I know he's going to be growing with it. And I am too. And we have complementary skill sets with some overlap. He's good at marketing and sales. I've done a lot of marketing, but I'm focused on the technical side of things. So it goes well.
Cool. Um, in terms of entry point, you talked a little bit about fine tuning. Um, for somebody who may have just sort of like a higher secondary or high school level, if you were to break that down,
Mm.
uh, how would you do it?
This is a hard one. This is like when I try to explain it to friends and family. So ChatGPT, there's a model behind that, which is it does a bunch of math to determine what is the most likely next word, and then it loops through and it can output words in sequence. And you can pretty much see this happening because they stream them as you're chatting with it. So you can see it generating words or block words or characters. And that model behind it is built out of math equations and numbers. And there's like numbers in it that represent the meaning, and to whatever extent it can perform logic on text. So what happened is they trained the initial model on trillions of tokens of text on the internet. And that's where it learned everything it knows. And at that point, it was almost useless because that's an exaggeration, but you couldn't interact with it in an intuitive way. But then this magical thing happened. We do this magical thing where take examples of, all right, this person is going to talk and this is what they say. So it's an input. And then this is a really good example of what we should give them back as a response. So you have this data set, we'll call it pictures, two columns. Inputs, user has a question. The output, this is a really good response. And then fine tune the model. So you train it a little bit more, just a tiny bit more compared to how much text you trained it on originally. then all of a sudden it can talk to you, become conversational, and it will instead of treating those questions from the users as just kind of like an autocomplete is the best way to describe it. Like instead it gives you like answers, and there's this shift in how the underlying model treats the inputs. And so we fine-tuned a conversational chatbot from this pre-trained base model. And I just think that's one of the coolest parts about this whole AI. And then where it gets crazy, and where I don't think most people have explored yet, is now, well, that's not the only way you can fine-tune this amazing tool. You could fine-tune it to do more specific subsets of that. Or you could fine-tune it to be conversational in a different way. And we have that power like at our fingertips right now to do that and just experiment. And it's really fun.
So I sort of understand what you're saying, but I'm just going to ask a little more questions, set up follow-ups, so we can kind of break this down a little bit more, right? A lot of people worry about fine-tuning a model that is not their own, meaning there's this sort of like misconception that you're sending your private data into ChatGPT, right? I don't know if you've encountered that question a lot. At least I have. And I'm curious, how would you describe that? Or how would you address that concern that we are fine tuning a model with our data and somehow our data is being exposed?
Well, with OpenAI specifically, you're a lot safer using their API with your data than you are just chatting through their web interface. If their web interface, they may retrain it using your data. Using the API, they say they won't. So I would trust them not to use my data through the API. Of course, it depends on how sensitive your data is. If you're like the government, you might want a special contract with them with special repercussions if they accidentally mix up their data. But I think for most people, you should be fine. And the second part to that answer is that the magic is not necessarily in the model, it's in the data set. So you preparing a really good data set that works for one model, take that data set and take it to a different model on and run it again. And of course, you have to validate that it works correctly, but you can get good results there too. So if you have the data set, you should be able to easily move from one provider to another, which is kind of one of the foundational principles we built Entrypoint on, is that we are hooking up a bunch of different LLM providers, and you can test your data set evenly across all of them. So you don't trust OpenAI? That's cool. We have other providers. Read their privacy policy, their terms of service. Make sure that they're at least saying that they're not going to do something mischievous with your data, and do your research. But it also depends on how important your data is. So I think for a lot of tasks we'll be able to use LLMs for, they don't need sensitive data. And we can build tools to kind of replace real personal sensitive data with synthetic versions of that data too. So that's another way to look at it.
That's cool. I like that explanation. I think there is potentially a risk involved in terms of even with OpenAI APIs, you're definitely doing, for the API nerds out there, you're not doing a post or a put, you're doing a get for the most of the times. So it's not like you're writing your data into the LLMs that are out there, but you're kind of utilizing the LLM to understand the question that you're asking, so to speak. It's almost like LLM is helping you supplying the vocabulary for the language that you speak. Would you look at it that way, or what are your thoughts on what I
Um,
just?
well, I think most completions endpoints where it's generating text are going to use a post
Okay,
request. But either way, I mean, it's secured through authentication and TLS or HTTPS. So it should be encrypted end to end, and you have to be authenticated to use their endpoints. And with fine tuning, we're actually bundling up a JSON-L file, which we upload, and then OpenAI runs a job. And then when the job finishes, then you have your like private model.
got it.
And you're calling your private model that they trained on your private data. That's kind of
Yeah,
a
and
sandbox to your account.
that private model is running in your cloud, whatever cloud provider you're choosing, right? I mean, it's not necessarily running on ChatGPT's cloud.
Uh, yeah, they have it's at least logically separated in their cloud environment
Yeah.
from what other users can see. So
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about use cases for businesses. Um, what are some use cases that you are most excited about?
yeah, well, we should first, acknowledge chatbots. I think every business is going to have a chatbot. Um, and that's all I want to talk about chatbots. They're super cool, but I'm really excited about a lot of the kind of mundane and almost boring, less exciting use cases than chatbots. I think there's a ton of back office operations that businesses do where like some kind of some information comes in and it needs to be like analyzed and then fed into something else. And that's always been a gap in software development. It's like software development we have databases, we have forms, we can collect data. It's really good at working with numbers. We can multiply numbers and things, but we can't like look at the name of or like the email address or domain of a contact lead and then the message they wrote and automatically decide if it's like a really good lead, like a hot lead that needs to go to our top salesperson right away. Traditional software development just doesn't have the right tools to do that effectively. There's hacks, there's workarounds. With large language models, now we can fill the gap, and it can analyze the text, and it can classify it. So it can say, this is really good, or, oh, this is spam, or, hey, this person's trying to phish us. This is fraudulent, stuff like that. And it can route it then too. It can detect like issues. So some information comes in about some kind of a problem. It can expedite the handling of issues by sending notifications to the right people, by tying it into existing software systems.
Like customer support issues you're talking
Yeah,
about.
absolutely. Customer support issues. You could say like, hey, this is low priority. It needs 48-hour response time. This one, escalate it to immediate, like 24/7 hotline.
Right.
Because this is a high value customer, it can consider all these factors that were hard to consider before. And
Yeah.
like, I think it turns around a lot of paradigms that we're used to. This is kind of simple. Maybe it's not very high value, but I think it illustrates the way that AI can change the way we design products entirely. So I've been toying with this idea of it's very common if you're creating something in a SaaS product, you have to name it first. Like you're creating some kind of an object in your workspace. You got to give it a name. Okay. Well, that's usually the first step. But with a large language model, first you can give it actually the most important information about that. And then it can just generate a name for you that's logical. And so like from a UX perspective, it could flip certain paradigms upside down of, oh, we don't have to start out by coming up with a name for everything. We could just
That is pretty cool.
let it
So
learn it from our configuration.
perhaps we should try walk through an example of this. I mean, if we want to pick a SaaS product, an existing one, let's see, is there like a CRM product or something like that?
Um, in terms of a practical use case for a
Yeah, yeah,
real
yeah.
company.
Like, what if we were to walk down a practical, like the naming that you're talking about?
Oh, uh, yeah, that's a good question. I haven't. Well, like, for developers, like ticketing issues,
Sure.
um, like you always have like UTrack or Jira. Um,
Right.
you have to configure all your workflows, and they're going to find so many ways to use AI to make it way easier. For example, instead of like that sidebar that's always like what priority it is and who to assign it to. I mean, usually that shows up right away. But with AI, what you could do is you could start with a streamlined workflow where you just start typing, let's call it a bug report to make it easy. A lot of times it could be a feature or a
Yeah.
story or whatever, but like a bug report. So you type in a bug report and it could very easily guess the severity and who it needs to be assigned to for you, as well
Yeah.
as a lot of other fields. It can just pre-populate those, whereas before we assumed that a user had to choose those, of course, using human intelligence.
Right.
So, or the title for it. Usually there's a title and a description field. I think that'll flip. It'll just be, okay, start by typing your description. We'll write a suggested title at the bottom.
Yeah.
And a lot of
Yeah,
that other, what's called metadata.
right. This example, like I think we all have experienced this on Zoom calls with Otter AI that records it. And if you don't necessarily title the meeting, it automatically comes up with a title for you with, some set of summary and, things like that. So like you don't have to break your head thinking about like, okay, what was our meeting about and
Yeah,
what should we call this meeting? Uh,
exactly.
that I mean, that's a very simple example, but something like that, in terms of the ticketing, issue or the bug report that you're talking about too, like, how do I title this bug or this issue where I'm describing many things, and then, how do I route it to the right person? Uh,
Mhm.
I think that's a great use case.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting ones. One that I can share personally for Simple Booth that we want to use LLMs for, and this was one of the first things I tested fine tuning on, was we have these photo galleries, and they have a title, and like it could be a wedding, it could be like a marketing event or a store grand opening or the name of a bar, and there's usually a hashtag too. So we have that. We know how many photos there are in it. So there's trends between weddings that be a certain number of photos, conferences or music festivals to, for example, so it correlates with those types of events. But this year we want to build a front end where users can explore galleries, public galleries, for inspiration for their next event and see what background is, what creative elements there were in the photos. But we're not going to ask our users to categorize all of their historical galleries for us. So we have to find a way to automatically choose like discrete categories, like this is wedding, this is happening a nightlife, or these kind of relevant categories. And it turns out, without using any of the photos, just using this gallery metadata, we can do that with fine-tuned models super effectively. So the plan is to just auto-categorize all of the content. And that opens the door for us to build an entirely new feature that we couldn't do without that type of information.
That's
So
very cool. Would this and this these type of applications would be categorized under RAG apps, I'm guessing, right?
this is without even using RAG, because
Okay.
this is just pulling in some metadata or record from your business and then putting that in a prompt. Um, if you needed to do a secondary step where you look up additional information, then that would be RAG. But yeah,
Yeah.
this is readily available information generally that I've talked about so far.
So in other words, we don't necessarily have to sort of, I mean, we could use the LLMs as is to do these operations at least the first step.
Yeah, you can do it with prompt engineering. It's very, very, very easy. As soon as you want to do it, maybe faster or at a larger scale, it's also very easy to do fine tuning and inexpensive. Um, RAG is also a really awesome tool. One way that I think that that's going to become kind of ubiquitous is that every company with a knowledge base or a help center, so like every SaaS app is going to have going to use some kind of tool to chunk that up into a database and be able to then use that in a chatbot, or to look up answers, at least a Q&A bot to look up answers and provide quick support for people.
Yeah. Like,
Speaking of help centers and knowledge bases, a really cool use case for LLMs is inconsistencies. So once you get to a certain point in your business size, you start having a bunch of fragmented information, and some of it gets out of date. And the LLMs can pull up, hey, these two articles say conflicting, which is right. And so they can like go check all your blog articles and all your, customer or employee facing content and make sure that it doesn't contradict each other.
that's pretty cool. So in terms of like that knowledge base that you were talking about in that example for SaaS apps, can it build over time? Like as you are, let's say you're developing new features for your SaaS app, is that something that Gen AI is capable of learning, or would that still require some sort of way to train that model with the additional set of improvements or new features?
So short answer is that there's going to be some tool you can sign up for, and it'll just ingest your whole knowledge base. And whenever you add something to it, like a new help article, it'll just add that and it'll be able to reference it. I mean, this is something you can kind of already do with OpenAI Assistance API. But there's lots of startups working on tools like that. But the long answer is that I think generative AI is most useful within software frameworks, and that kind of put it in systems that are deliberate and intentional. Much like human intelligence
Right.
can be great and powerful, but we achieve a lot more when we organize ourselves into like organizational units, like companies or nonprofits or governments. Um, and so all these things are going to have to fit into systems. And even if we have really powerful, smart artificial intelligence, I think it's going to be humans that put it in this like really systematic um, diagram of whatever they're working on. And that's kind of like the first step in aligning AI to what we want to get out of it, is putting it in our systems. So none of it's going to happen without a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's very similar to the cognitive process of how our mind works. How we learn things, and a lot of our learning comes from what we perceive, what we see, and over time we build that knowledge base in our own head. So you know, it's sort of like the same way. What are your thoughts on intuition? Like, where would AI in the current capability of Gen AI would rank? Um, and what sort of use cases are you seeing in that area?
Did you say for intuition or for
Intuition, yes,
like does it have intuition?
yes,
Yes. I think it has intuition. Um, in the sense that it can come to a conclusion with limited details, and that the knowledge inside the model can map things really well. And that's primarily why, for a lot of things, I'm preferring to talk to ChatGPT than Google. Not everything, but
right.
for a lot of things, because if I don't know the right keyword, I can kind of circle around what I'm thinking of, and it'll intuit the answer, right? Um, and with fine tuning in particular and training models, um, the way I think of it is that you're teaching it intuition for your use case. So if you train it on 10 examples of like tickets in your ticketing platform, let's call it support tickets. So this customer writes in, and you say you have this list of past support tickets and how you or your human team intelligently ranked them, like after the fact, that was a high priority one. So I can train the model on that list of input outputs, and it will have the ability to intuit how high priority the ticket is after that training, like a human would. Because as a human, like the way I think of intuition is I can look at a support ticket and I'm like, oh, this is important. Like that's intuition, right? I'm not going to sit there and dissect it. It's like, well, it's important because they used this word, or like it's not rules based in my mind. And the AI has that really cool ability too. It doesn't have like a list of rules it uses. It just uses this vast high dimensional space um, that's been trained and to come up with an answer. So
Yeah.
I don't know, does that answer your question?
Well, I think it's sort of like at this point, it's a thought experiment, is
Mm.
how I would look at it. Like people get a little bit hung up on what, it depends on what you mean intuition, like, uh, because one could argue what you may describe is that it's more discernment, kind of
Mhm.
like, and there's an element of intuition in discernment. What appears to be a low priority to you, if you were to just do a keyword search, might actually be a high priority because it's a high paying customer, or whatever it might be, right? Like, so I think, for lack of a better word, I tend to use more deterministic or non-deterministic outcomes. What are you wanting to expect out of it? And then you can sort of avoid the definition of words like intuition. What does that mean?
Yeah,
That's why I brought up that question. And since you're kind of in that immersed in that world, it's interesting to hear your viewpoint.
they can certainly imitate intuition, uh, and in practical terms, you can teach it intuitively,
That's right.
because you can give it examples without giving it the explicit rules, and so that's
Exactly.
an intuitive way of teaching it. But yeah, I agree. It's best not to get too hung up on
Yeah,
the
and the other part is, so there's one camp that wants to nitpick the definition of the word, And the other part is also the misunderstanding of equating Gen AI to more rules, because it's not rules. It's definitely not, it's not like an if then else set of programming language constructs, right? I mean, it's actually, you can get unexpected results. So that to me, it's sort of like you got to thread that needle a
So
little.
there's two parts to that. On the using LLMs side, I think we're kind of trying to make it rule based by using prompt engineering, where it does become this list of like, do this, don't do that. It's like that's almost what we're used to. Whereas I'm more excited about exploring this intuitive way of teaching it that
That's
is
right.
really, really uncomfortable for people. But on the unexpected output side, I did this whole video on, are LLMs deterministic or not? And there's this component at the end where it's called token sampling. So it's basically, at this point, it has a list of possible words or tokens that it could output, and there's a probability assigned to each. And actually, if you set your parameters in a certain way, you'll get the same output every time for a given input.
Yeah.
And there's no indeterministic aspects to the math of the core model, because it's, most of it is linear algebra. It's multiplying matrices together, right? So
Yeah.
so math is deterministic, but because most use cases, you allow some randomness to make it feel more creative. It's almost a little hack for creativity. It's not true creativity,
Right.
but it spices it up. I think that people view it as like, well, you can never get the same output from these. But actually, yes, you can. You can do. That's why, like evals, these evaluation frameworks would not work if you couldn't get the same output every time from large language models. But they do
And,
work.
and that's why I think observability is becoming a big, that there's so many AI apps that are addressing that observability space, in terms of like which dimension is the response coming from, and so on and so forth. It's a
Yeah. Well, to get LLMs to do sort of high value jobs for us right now, there's a lot of moving parts. And if you don't have observability, then you maybe see the in and the out, but you don't know what happened in between, and then you can't troubleshoot. And in the early days of software development, there weren't always good tools,
yeah.
and even in some dark areas of people using JavaScript, like it's like you can make simple mistakes that you spend hours to debug. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think, yeah, they probably learned from software that, hey, we need good tools in place if we're going to do this effectively, especially because we're dealing with companies' data. And I think a lot of companies are probably a little hesitant.
Yeah.
It's like these chatbots can do a lot with our data if we let them. So
What are some cool AI tools? I know everybody should go and play with Entrypoint.ai. Apart from that, what are some cool tools that everybody's worked with, played with ChatGPT a little bit, but apart from the obvious, what are some tools that people should go check out?
oh man, you know what? I'm not a good person to ask this question.
No
I'm
worries.
like I'm kind of a late adopter on a lot of things. So I like to see what shakes out.
Yeah.
Um, I know a lot of people really like using Perplexity. Um, I know that a lot of the Copilot,
Yeah.
Microsoft Copilot, and
That's
a lot of people are enjoying those. For I guess my answer is probably not a very good one, but I've been using Replicate quite a bit. Part of that is because they're one of the LLM providers we integrate with on Entrypoint. But Replicate is a really cool way to experiment with different language models. They have a very good selection. They also have a lot of image models. And so it's a cool way to see what's out there pretty
yeah.
quickly.
who's the provider for Replicate?
Replicate is hosting a bunch of models from a bunch of different companies. So like they have the Mistral models, the Meta models, a lot of open source ones because the proprietary ones tend to host their own. But there's mixed ones where it's like some of Meta's aren't totally open source, but you can still play with them for research or experimental purposes and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So check
Yeah.
out Replicate.
Yeah, no, that's good. In terms of Entrypoint, let's talk a little bit about that before we wrap up. Um, what is something that folks can try? I don't know if you even offer a free version or anything like a trial. Um,
We do. We offer a free version with up to 50 training examples. So your data set is capped to be really small, but it's cool because you can actually get results with less than 50 examples. So so there's enough there to definitely test the waters and fine tune your own model. We offer every 2 weeks. We offer a free 4-day masterclass, which is only an hour a day. So it's not that big of a
that's not
commitment.
bad.
But
Yeah.
but that's totally free. And then we upgrade your account too for the duration of the class, plus a little bit. And we teach you how to do it. And we teach you the difference between fine tuning and prompt engineering and when to choose between them and at what point. So that's a good way to get into it. And we do have an emphasis right now on education. So we're trying to produce quite a bit of YouTube and blog content between working on the product, of course, to try to educate people on this space.
Cool. Hey, Mark, I really enjoyed this chat. Next episode, I'd like to dive a little more deeper into some of the technical concepts of prompt engineering, fine tuning. Maybe we'll kind of geek out on some of the technical stuff
Yeah,
that we sort of alluded to on this episode, but I think we should do a deep dive, which could be fun. And
that'll be awesome.
looking forward to it. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, David. Talk to you soon.